record. Thank you. So we'll just go into that. So basically, you got your first few gigs to running MTC, and how did you kind of get to your MTC direction? I think you answered it a little bit, but I'm just going to...
Well, I didn't. I got bored with my own career, so I didn't keep going from there. I was associate director at the MTC in the kind of late 80s. Like Roger Hodgman was running the company then, and he just had heard about the work that I was doing with the students at WAPA, and he got me across. And then I got, like as artistic director, I got a job running the South Australian Theatre Company in the early 90s. Did that for 4 years, then left and freelanced for the rest of that decade, and then I got offered the Melbourne Theatre Company job in 2000. So look, it was what used to be in a way like a fairly standard career path for someone who was going to be an artistic director of one of these companies. You know, you're an associate director somewhere, you get to run one of the smaller companies, and then if you're lucky, you get one of the big two, which is Sydney or Melbourne, I guess. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. I'm sorry, I'm kind of taking over Jane's job here. So
it's good for her to know that there's a succession plan in place, you know.
Also, like everyone in the chat, please feel free to jump in if you've got questions.
Yes, do indeed.
Yeah, so here's one from Lucy. When you say you got a job at so-and-so company, what was that actual process? Do you already have mates or networks there that you can ask, or did you apply properly through a process, or how did that work?
Well, look, that's a very good question, because I think it's there's a slightly different answer to that when you're talking about getting a job directing a play at a company, which weirdly in my, like basic career path, that was never the thing that I kind of needed to do, because I just got offered associateships or directorships. So I never had to go with my cap in my hand to a theatre company and say, I've got this play that I'd like to direct. I got the kind of the staff job, and then part of that brief was to direct a number of plays. And in all the cases of the kind of those stepping stones in terms of like being an artistic director, those jobs were, I was kind of semi-sought out for those jobs. It wasn't that, the only job that I actually applied for was the job at WAPA. Because obviously I was in New Zealand and I didn't know anything. I just kind of wrote a letter to them going, I may be completely wrong for this, I don't know, but this is what I've done. And as it happened, they were interested and I got that job. The other jobs, I kind of joined the application process, but it was on request. But if to answer your question probably more usefully, I reckon that that process of getting a directing gig, and that's where I think life has become significantly harder. I don't envy any of you, the actors. Actors audition. Directors can't really audition in the instance, can they? Your work can be seen. That's why I always say to young directors, do stuff however you can do it. It's telling me my internet connection's unstable. Is everyone still seeing me? Yes, you'll tell me.
We can see you now. It was breaking up a little bit, but
okay. Yeah, and then you can. I've certainly, as someone running a company, I have accepted and given jobs to people with a strong vision for something who've come in and pitched it to me as an idea with a strong vision. But I think that it's hard, very hard, if one doesn't know, if you don't have some experience of the work that you've been doing, the nature of the work you've been doing.
Yeah. Jane asked, Simon, do you think that that's still the trajectory given the movement, say, between Sam and Leah's QTC? Now, yeah, not quite sure exactly. I'm just trying to piece together what that was in relation to, but I'm sure you understand
that. Yeah. Look, I think it very well could be still for artistic directors the trajectory. I think that Sam Strong probably very particularly took the job at the QTC to have been someone who had proved that they could run a state theatre company in a smaller environment, and now he's probably sitting. This is, you know, make sure this recording doesn't go anywhere where he can have me up for saying this, but he's probably sitting there now waiting for one of the people, for either Brett or Kip, who are running the STC and the MTC at the moment, to leave, and then he'll be applying and wanting to be that person, for sure.
Okay. Jane provided context. Thank you, Jane.
All right.
So we've got a question from Georgie. You discussed technology a little in your interviews. How do you see theatre and technology meet? What is your perspective on new technologies in theatre?
Oh, that was good. I guess, you know, always have to put this into the context of me being old, but I don't. I obviously still put a huge amount of faith in the idea that the theatre is a live idiom, and that remains contrary to everyone's expectations. You know, everyone's thought it's going to be dying for so long now, but I think that the reason that it's held on, that it's still got a beating heart, is that you just can't replace as an idea, you know, that live, that sense of the live experiences that audiences continue to relate to. But I think that there are
you're dropping out there.
Examples of where people really know. What was that? Have I gone off?
Now it's better. It's all good. Sorry, we may have missed a little bit of your talk.
Absolutely nothing of value in what I was saying, I'm sure. It's annoying. I'm sorry. You momentarily entered the... I keep getting this... Oh, that's from Geo Valentine. Who's that? I keep seeing this chat coming up. I'm being overwhelmed by new technology as we speak. Is someone listening in? Is Alexandra listening in from the beach? Yeah. Now I'm getting distracted by the images of your...
It's a very interesting platform to be working on.
Are you on your balcony, Alex?
No, it's just a background of Auckland.
Very good. Like TV. How good. Anyway, what was I saying? I think that there are fantastic examples of technology supporting the live element in the theatre. In the most simple, I'll just say one thing about the kind of simplest sense of it. I find going to the theatre where film is being used and the screen image is huge and the actors are small, I find that an incredibly annoying environment to be in unless it's being used at its very, very, very best. And when I did an adaptation production of North by Northwest recently, and I knew I had to use film, but the reason that I did this thing where there were the actors were making the film via small models, and that was it was live, being created live, the film element, so the audience could see. They had the double interest of seeing the actors make the film that they were seeing on the screen in front of them, so it kept it working on a human level. And then I'll just add to that, from a point of view of real ignorance, I'm sure that there are incredibly brilliant ways that new technology that I don't even really know about has been absorbed into the theatre that's far more sophisticated than just, do we put a screen up there and use a TV screen? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we just got a question from Michaela Jansen. In addition to your work with major theatre companies, you've also directed spectacular musicals such as Priscilla, Strictly Ballroom, and Ladies in Black. Does your directorial process differ between plays and musicals? And if so, how?
Just quickly, I didn't direct Strictly Ballroom. I directed Muriel's Wedding. Don't attribute Strictly Ballroom to me, please. I didn't think that was very good. It does alter a little bit. There are some crossovers on larger theatre works. I think maybe I started working in music theatre because I was doing, quite a few large-scale, kind of technically quite complex works in the theatre, and it made me a suitable candidate to go into the large-scale works in music theatre. Much more difficult in the music theatre to get a intimate relationship with the actors. The picture is so big that it's quite hard not to be, as the director of the piece, not to be constantly thinking about the larger picture and the way the production has to flow. That's really an enormous amount of your job as a director of musicals, I think. Structure, technology, scene changes, making sure the whole thing flows as an idea. But in music theatre you have a significantly more active number of collaborators, and that is one of the really fun things about it, is that you have at your side the music director and the choreographer, and you're working together to create how the work is going to be. So that is, that's a different pleasure in terms of working on a piece of music theatre.
Yeah, so do you feel like that sense of...
No, you go.
I was just going to say, do you feel that sense of constant collaboration during the process that you find in musicals to differ from maybe some of your more larger plays, for example, and the way that you incorporate sound and maybe in set and things like that?
Well, no, that's a very good point, actually. I think that the closest that I can relate in terms of a piece of straight theatre and the music theatre process is the sound person. I really, in the larger works that I do, I like the composer to be in the room, working alongside the production being developed, and creating the soundtrack in connection to what is happening organically in the room, and what then I can speak right to the moment. We get to the end of the scene, it feels like this is what you need. That is where it is true. That's where that would come together, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just don't have that number of people in a piece of straight theatre. The team is by definition not as big.
Yeah. This is kind of elaborating from what you've already said so far, but another question on the difference between working with ensembles and musicals versus smaller casts in plays.
Could you repeat that? You just cut out for me just in the middle of that.
Yeah. So what's the difference in working with ensembles and musicals versus smaller casts in plays?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I think that I've always thought that one of the required skills of the director is to find the voice that works for each individual actor. If you're trying to communicate an actor to help them be at their best, often actors respond in very different ways. I'm unstable, I'm being told. Often actors respond the actors, any people, but people hear differently, respond differently to different things. So the kind of perfect relationship actor-director is directing a one-person play. because then you only have to speak to that actor in the language that that actor understands. And as you get any bigger from that, you're then using multiple voices, sometimes quite privately, to different actors for different things. And you have this kind of Uber voice that's your director's voice that's going, okay, everyone, regardless of your individuality, we all need to be working at this point to achieve this thing. And when you're directing the musical theatre, you spend far more time in that voice than in any other voice, because it's nearly always you're working on a picture that's beyond just getting to that individual person. Of course you do. You go to your leading man or woman and, you know, talk to them about the song they're singing or the scene that they're playing, but you do spend a shitload of time with those with the ensemble going, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is the atmosphere we're trying to create, and looking at the whole thing and going, you move on that line there, would you move over to there, and on that line there, would you cross to there, and then could you all do this here, little response, we need a group response to this here. It's kind of much more orchestral and in a way less personal, I think.
Yeah. From Greta, do you have any secrets or tips that you have gained from your hands-on experience in the industry that you could give us?
On your Greta.
It is quite a large question.
Well, it is a really large question. I think if I can, secrets or tips is hard. Work, you know, obviously work from your heart and work to things that immediately touch you first and foremost. And I say that as someone who often
We're losing you.
always regretted the times where I kind of haven't, where I've done something for a different reason. And I think that, I mean, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but in terms of helping you guys, this is, you can take this or leave this, communicate and be out there, and don't be at all reticent in writing to people, responding to work that you see. Those things, they lodge with people, you know, they lodge with people, I think, you know, like it's a hard industry to break into, but I know that quite a few of the strong bonds and working relationships that I have had have been in a way generated from a random letter that may or a note or a conversation that may have happened a year or two before the actual fruition of it came to happen, you know. So I think it's kind of worth remembering that it is a community, and that a lot of things happen because of connections between like minds that just fire and go from there. And then I think, you know, obviously the whole point is that there's a lot of luck, respect, but if luck strikes, then be ready. Yeah. It's a bit like I said in week 1, says Jane, I've seen on chat. What's she saying? I'm only using a little bit of it.
Yeah. It's a bit like I said in week 1. If you love a show, write to the director and offer to take them out for a coffee. They will probably say no, but be persistent. People always respond to your analysing and being inspired by their work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Question from Alex. What has been the best experience you've had as a director out of everything you've directed? This is kind of following on from previous question. Also, have you ever committed yourself to a project that you didn't enjoy or disliked? If so, how did you deal with that kind of situation? Were you able to pull out of the project or change it for the better in time?
Okay, my internet connection's unstable, and I missed a little bit of that, but I think the gist of the question was, what's my favorite show I've ever done, or most rewarding show I've ever done? And secondly, if I'm really hating something, what do I do about it? Was that the second part of the question?
Yeah, Alex is nodding, so I'm guessing that's correct.
Wow, Alex. I always find it very, very difficult to answer that "what's your favorite show" question. But I think that I've got. I'll just answer it in two ways if I can, without going on too far. I would say that in general, I have had my best times working on things where I have been generating something from the ground up. Like, that just gives me a lot of satisfaction to work on new works, but not just new works where I'm helping the writer to structure and write their play, but for example, the North by Northwest adventure was a really fruitful one for me, because we were developing it right from the beginning, from the film, and I was doing this thing with this miniature puppetry, which I'd never done before, and I had to kind of work out how to make it. Just suited my obsessive compulsive personality to, every day after rehearsal, I'd be in the rehearsal room for another 4 or 5 hours trying to work out how to get miniature cars look like they were running down a cliff face, like all that stuff really appealed to me, but some of the new musicals that I've done have really appealed in a similar way. So that's kind of point A. But point B to that is that I have to remind myself that there's an enormous value in doing something that is formed and gives you as a director, or I guess, as an actor too, it gives to you, it feeds you. Without you, it's far less of a two-way thing. So if I work on a piece of writing that I see as being a complete and perfect piece of writing, there you go, it's one of the great plays, then my energy is entirely about serving that writer, realizing that work, and getting back from it the enormous richness that it has as a work of art, and that I was speaking to Jane, actually, because I did a production of Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing in Sydney recently, and I had been kind of turning down just play, not in favor of musicals, but just going, oh, this is just another play. I want to do something that has a few more, flexes my muscles a little bit more. And in the muscle flexing thing, I always count the Shakespeares that I do as part of the muscle flexing, because there's a much bigger degree of give and take in doing a Shakespeare. But be that as it may, I was really amazed in doing that play, which is just a small play with 7 people in it, highly intellectual text, how much food it gave me. So I didn't have to do nearly as much work. I wasn't trying to solve whether the structure of the play was good or not. It was just giving to me the brilliance of Tom Stoppard's mind or heart. As far as I'm sorry, I'm being really boring. As far as the bad experience thing, I've never found a way of getting out of an experience that is going off, and it's really interesting that you asked that to me, because I always think I can beat this thing, I can crack it, I'll get it under control, I'll get it right. And there have been a couple of times in my life where, when I've looked back on it, I've thought, at that point there, why did I not just walk away from the project? Like, these are big projects or whatever, and you just go, I actually had an opportunity at that point to withdraw, and I didn't. I thought I can make this work, and it's just killed me. So thanks for the question, and I'll try and remember that you asked it next time I'm in the middle of a hellish experience.
Thank you.
Question from Antonio. I had the pleasure of seeing Muriel twice, once in Sydney, and then I was greeted with a slightly different version of the production in Melbourne. How do you negotiate the need to adapt? I know, for example, a song was cut because it wasn't quite working. Is that a choice that comes from you or the collaborators or any other form of decision making?
Yes. Look, doing things that run for a long time or have a different, more than one incarnation is like it's a really useful and fun thing to be able to do, because you get to watch it for long enough and experience it for long enough to start realizing where the flaws might be. Like if a show opens and closes within 4 weeks, in some ways there'll be certain things about what did or didn't work about it. But in terms of thinking of solutions to solve it, sometimes that eludes you. But usually changes come from they'll come from a number of different sources. In the case of Muriel's wedding, the team was a very tight. I'm pausing because I see the sign coming up saying I'm unstable, so I pause and hope to write it out. In the case of that show, we were able to get together as a think tank after the show closed and say, what did we want to achieve? Lots of the thing about that show that we wanted to achieve was to get it shorter, and we're still trying to get it shorter. The virus interrupted all the trips I was making to New York, because it looks like it's got a chance of going on there. And we are rewriting sections of it again now as we speak, because where we still feel, in having had a chance to now look at it for a number of years, suddenly saw where we thought that it could still make some improvements. And part of the thing to do with that, just parenthetically, is that part of the journey with Muriel's wedding was breaking free of the film. There was in the way that it was put together in the first place, there was a slight sense. Look, the writer, PJ, who wrote the film, wrote our adaptation, and there were areas where he was really daring about what he did that the film didn't do. But in other areas, we felt like we were following the film and the trajectory of the film and the scene-by-scene-ness of the film pretty accurately, and adding songs to it. And just in the last 6 months, we did something to the end of Act 1 of that show. I'm saying this to you because you have seen the show, where like Muriel's always gone home, and with Bryce, and the famous scene from the film in the beanbag with the exploding beans has happened, and it's at the end of that scene that Rhonda falls and can't get up. And we just finally decided that actually what that scene constantly stopped us doing was having a big end to the act. Like it was, because by its very nature, it was small. It was an intimate scene between 2, then 5 people. It just stopped it always felt like the act ended with a little bit of a whimper. And we threw that idea out and went, okay, we're not going to do the beanbag scene. We're going to solve it in a completely different way to the same result. And that was enormously liberating.
Jane just added here, that's such a good point about carrying on with the production you have no faith in. So this is, I guess, from your previous question. Often, especially young directors will feel the compulsion to continue with the project, partly hoping to cement a career and partly, sometimes mostly, for the pay. It is a very tricky balance as you have to weigh up what is worse for your growing reputation, to be considered unreliable because you've got the project, or to be considered as a crap director because you carried on with the turkey. Jane goes on to say, my last directing gig was at Red Stitch with a terrible play I hated but agreed to do because I thought I could make it better. I should never have done it. Terrible reviews and a terrible experience. So follow your instincts.
Yeah, never embark on something that you don't, never start a project that you don't like for the wrong reasons. You know, like if it doesn't hit your heart in some way, you should just never do it. Yeah.
A question from Georgie. How did you figure out what you wanted to direct? Nice and simple.
Well, I'm very, I like directing an enormous number of different things. So I think it probably comes back to the similar, the same thing we're talking about in terms of learning when to say no. Like, I feel like you read something, and I usually find that within the first few pages of the script, actually, I will get an impulse about it, which is usually, this is just me, it's not lots of other people, but usually I see a version of the design in my head. I see the world in which I can imagine that play taking place. And that's the first grabbing point for me. And then I'll read on, and I always, you know, obviously you like a play that you don't want to put down. Like you want I love a work to have some element of the thriller about it in a way. And it can be an emotional thriller, it can be any version of that, but something that makes you keep wanting to turn the pages because you assume that will convert for the audience into a similar experience. But I'm certainly like equally attracted to small, intense plays that are about, you know, the relationships between people and large tapestry works. Yeah.
Question from Emily. Last week we were chatting to Adina Jacobs on adapting Shakespeare. What's your process for adapting a classic like what you've done with Macbeth?
Can I just quickly add to that question and just tail end onto it?
Yeah.
There was some decisions in it, and I was just trying to research if there was a script, someone who adapted the script, or if it was more of a you-driven thing. Certain scenes within that Macbeth cut out dialogue, and like when Lady Macbeth enters, is she on the phone? I think having this discussion with Macbeth rather than the face-to-face early on.
Yes.
And just like that decision project on the director as the author.
Yes.
Sorry,
yeah.
Just adding on to Emily's really good question. Sorry. Bye.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yes, I find with Shakespeare, and he's definitely like my favorite. That's the kind of, he's definitely my obsession. I just have to answer this question a little bit circuitously, like all my other answers. For a long time, I always go through the script like a bazillion times and do the adaptation myself. For a long time with Shakespeare, I had a philosophy which was based on the idea that because the language was difficult for people, I would make the world as contemporary and as accessible as I possibly could, on the grounds that if people recognized what they were looking at, it would help them hear what was meant in the text if they're having a little bit of difficulty with it. And of course, as soon as you decide, like with that production of Macbeth, I had this is a little bit unusual, but I had two very different productions of Macbeth in my head. when I was first asked to do it, I've have always had a kind of had an interest in doing a production of Macbeth that was lit entirely by naked flame, that there were no theatre lights at all, and that I just thought I'd use all the lighting budget to pay the fire officers who had to be in the theatre every night, because it was lit entirely by candlelight. And that would have been kind of a production almost like on an earth floor with flame. And Jane is saying she wishes she'd been in that production of it. And as I talked to the MTC about that, was increasingly kind of guided by them to say, they were kind of saying, but we want it to be another one of those contemporary, like thriller-based Shakespeare's that you've done, because I'd done the Richard III and I'd done a Hamlet, and they'd all been in this kind of this spirit. So I started thinking of the play from that point of view, and it was quite a long, circuitous process for me. I threw out one design completely and started working on the one that ultimately made the cut. And as I therefore approached the script of Macbeth, knowing that I wanted it to be in a contemporary world, those are the things that you encounter. Like, you encounter messengers, and you know that you're then dealing with an audience's question. Okay, you put it in this world that you want me to recognize as a contemporary world, but that doesn't make any sense, because why didn't they just make a phone call? And that's how it would happen. In this contemporary world, a messenger wouldn't arrive from Florence or, So I made certain adjustments to the script from that point of view. In fact, that the scene with the mobile phone where Lady Macbeth gets the message of Macbeth's arrival, interestingly, because it's a small picture thing, that happened in the rehearsal room, because we were just kind of grappling with that, because it was a manageable thing. Other things you just have to work out beforehand, because the design has to be delivered so early. So that's why when I gave the documentation on that show, I included the script that I'd put together, because I need to create a script to communicate to the design team what my imagery for each scene was, to help that generate things, and via that I needed to be able to make decisions for the design way before we hit the rehearsal room. Did I even answer the question? I'm not sure.
No, that's all good. Like, all of this is like really helpful information for us as directors. I mean, we're all just starting out, and so to hear personal experience of different directors who are already out there is incredible. Alex just kind of tailed into saying, can I just say the set of the production of Macbeth was cooler than any house I have ever seen or could ever imagine. We've got a question from Chelsea. What do you think is the biggest mistake new or established directors make, or mistakes, I guess?
I think, for whatever reason, taking your eye off the main ball is the thing. It's like, I feel like it's important to note that that very few people are kind of iconoclastic visionaries. That most people those people have a set of rules that are entirely their own, that you can't really use as rules, because they break all the rules, and that's just because they are have some kind of level of brilliance, if not genius, just brilliance. But otherwise, I think I always go unstable. I always go that there's only one primary creator in in the theatre, and that's the writer. You know, like, none of the rest of us can do it without the writer having written something. And if you first, don't be afraid of your first responsibility being to the writer to realize what they've done. When I'm working on a new work, I always say to the actors, let us, for the first 2.5 weeks of the rehearsal process, approach this piece of work as if it is a finished work by Arthur Miller, and give it our best shot, because that's your first duty. And we all know that if someone put Hamlet into a workshop situation, there would be hundreds of things that the actors and the director would say, but this doesn't make sense. I don't get why my character's doing this here. It's like, so, but we don't do that because it's Hamlet. And then we realize kind of that it's a breathtaking idea and all its inconsistency. So I feel like that's an important thing to remember for as it were, people starting out, that you can do, that don't be inventive for the sake of being inventive because you feel like you have to be inventive because that's what gets you attention. But also don't be afraid of having you've got kind of a vision for a work that comes from, have I gone off? No sound.
Hang on. Yep, sorry, that was my fault. I completely forgot I was on mute. Yeah, no. You're back now. Thank you.
No, like I was saying, don't be afraid of having a vision. I mean, it's not what I'm saying. I mean, it's great if you have a view of something that has come to you very clearly, then that's fantastic, and follow that. But also, yeah, stay true to the work.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Jane and myself, actually, I was going to ask this question myself about casting. Jane specifically asked, can you talk about your casting process for Macbeth? Last week, Adina was talking about her decision to work with people who she worked with before and who she knows can improvise in a very abstract way. With Macca's, there were a lot of actors you'd not worked with. So could you talk about your process with auditions?
Yeah, my process with auditions is very clear for a lot of Shakespeare particularly, which is that what I'm interested in, especially when you're working on making the play contemporary or changing context for the play, is actors who are flexible, can use the script flexibly. So I will get actors to come in with a piece of Shakespeare completely of their choice. Doesn't need to be from the play that I'm doing, just a piece of Shakespeare that they know really well so that they are at liberty to play with it. And then I'll get them to do it, and then I'll ask them to do it in a completely different way, or I'll give them like different scenarios to be in, and I will see just how flexible they are with that text and how detailed they can be about changing the internal engine of that text or the internal motivations of the character, because sometimes, you know, people can just lock down on one thing about Shakespeare and not find it very easy to work with it. And usually in the back of my mind, I have like a track of casting that I'm thinking that person might be good for. So I'm cheating a little bit about the impro that I get them to. It's not really impro, it's just the adjustments that I'm getting them to do with the script. Look, in that production too, I was really, really interested in making the cast as ethnically diverse as I could. So that meant that I was seeing a lot of actors who who I hadn't worked with before and who possibly hadn't had a lot of experience with Shakespeare before, which was an interesting process to go through. But I think with you're after a quality in usually you're just after some essential quality that you either see as vital to the character or vital to what you're trying to do with the character. And you're looking to see whether an actor either brings that into the room or is capable of accessing it through a little bit of give and take and help for yourself. But I always feel like saying that to actors who are auditioning, that they should never forget that often that is the case, that when actors go into audition, they can walk in and they can be brilliant, but they just don't have the particular thing that the director is looking for in his or her casting of that particular role. There can be nothing to do with the quality of the work that they're presenting. They just, unfortunately, they just don't feel like the feeling that the director's after.
Yeah, I mean, just elaborating on that, because we talk a lot about how we go about casting, but another really important aspect is how we go about finding the collaborators to all the other aspects of theatre. How do you kind of go about finding the right people for things like sound, AV, set design, things like that? How do you kind of find those people?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I've always, for ages and ages, I wanted that you didn't need to cast your creative collaborators. I wanted, because I'm arrogant enough to think I could direct anything, you wanted to find the designer or the composer or whatever and you feel if they're really good, they can design anything. That's their skill that they can. But in fact, in visuals, I think in amongst designers, for example, people and composers, people do have, in the end, have a style. They have something that they tend to do better. And so I think that you do, as a director, end up needing, in a certain sense, to know what you want your show to feel like, look like, and cast accordingly. Think of the designer who's going to serve that particular vision perhaps better. I do think it's really, really important. I think there's no way except by doing it, but to find this out. But you really want designers or composers or that core creative team. They just have to be people who you have a simpatico relationship with. It's vital. You can direct actors who you don't particularly like. That's a different contract, it's a different thing. But I think because you're working very closely with your core creative team, you just have to have a little bit of that going on with them, I think, for it to work well. And not be afraid of saying things to them, all that stuff.
Well, that's really good to know as well, because especially the difference between working with your performers and then working with the rest of your creative team, they feel like very different, I guess, dynamics sometimes, but also similar. We've got a question from Lucy. I found your casting of Camilla Ellis, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but fascinating as a young theatre maker. How did you land on someone so young? How did you get to trust someone of that age and level of experience? And Jane has commented on that last point of the question.
So who are you talking about again?
Camille Ellis. Lucy, did you want to chip in?
Yeah.
Hi, yes, hi, hello. He was one of the witches in
Oh. No, that's not. Yeah. I'm sure that's not his name. Anyway, I know exactly who you mean. It probably is, or maybe it's just pronounced God. Jane, can you remember you were his co-star? What was his? It wasn't Camille, was it?
I did a little search of him
That's him.
I just
Anyway.
can't. Anyway, look, he was obviously there's a starting point there where I was going, I need to get for the, without any actual children in it, who was going to be young enough to play Flesh and to play the kid in the Macduff scene. So I knew that I was searching for that person, but he is a perfect example of someone who had absolutely the it factor for me. I was obsessed by, he was like, I just like everything. He sent me stuff by video first because he lives in Sydney. There was something about his, he was incredibly at ease with his own body. He'd actually been a dancer for quite a little while and then given it up because it was too girly. But he still had that element in his body, and I found him incredibly charismatic. So he was unbelievably unskilled in Shakespeare. He was just really, really unskilled. He was essentially great naturalistic television actor in a sense, but he had absolutely the thing I was after. And I went to, it was like ridiculous to pay living away allowance to someone of 16, coming from Sydney to work on a show with, usually you pay living away allowances to someone venerable, but it was really important to me to find, that he just solved it for me, that casting. Just can't, that's weird.
Well, thank you for doing that. I think that casting of him was really important and made a huge impact on some of us other younger people, like being cast in something like MTC alongside Jane Griffiths. I think it was really impressive, and just thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Just a shout out, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to please pitch in, through the message portal, or just spoken through the voice. Here we've got one from Emily Keegan. What's it like combining someone not so experienced in Shakespeare with someone like Jane?
The best version of it is that obviously you've got someone like Jane who's hugely experienced in Shakespeare, who can be as much of a help to that person as they are prepared to let them be, and obviously that's something that requires negotiation, because it's kind of the rule of the theatre that actors don't note other actors, and that's not how it works, but if the right relationship springs up when you've got someone of great experience and someone of very little experience, then either directly or indirectly, obviously the experienced person's experience can rub off on the less experienced person. But the important thing, I think, as a director, apart from that, is that you need to make sure that the person with less experience has a voice in the room, and that those people who are obviously probably need to put more energy into helping those people to articulate themselves than you obviously need to put into helping Jane articulate herself, because that's her job. Articulation is her skill set, So Jane will bring 100 things to the table, but we can't ever forget, as a director, that the kid over there has never done Shakespeare doesn't know, for starters, half the rules of what we're talking about, and you need to keep them up to speed. And it doesn't have to be nearly that extreme difference either. I think that's part of the thing as a director needs to do anyway, is to try and make everyone, every actor in the room's contribution feel that it is valid. And sometimes that means kind of digesting and accommodating some really ideas that may to you seem incredibly stupid, like completely off track, but not dismissing things out of hand. Yeah.
And kind of a follow-up on that, I think this is one of the questions that Jane wanted to ask you personally. But how do you go about negotiating, or I guess handling situations where the dynamics are quite different or difficult or sensitive within the actors? So how do you kind of deal with sensitive actor dynamics, I guess?
Yes. Yeah. That's such a good question, and very, I mean, it's not a question that I can answer by, there's no rule book on that scenario. There really is just trying to accommodate and ameliorate the different points of view in the room. I often also think that people, like if you're reasonably intuitive, you have to feel like your kind of empathy radar needs to be very, very up to work successfully as a director. And part of that radar is maybe telling you where a behavior is coming from that is not how it's manifesting. You know, people can be aggressive when they're insecure, or, you know, over talkative when they're insecure. You know, there can be a number of different things, or more trickily, you know, emotional because they don't feel they're getting power in the room. And you need to tread that dynamic very clearly. Like, I am personally of the view that I will, you know, never lose my temper. It will take a huge amount to get me to get cross, because if I get temperamental, then that is just opening the floodgates for everyone else to behave in the same way. So as a director, I think that you're trying to create an atmosphere in which people feel secure. Hopefully they're having a bit of fun, because I think quite a lot of good things come out of fun, because if you're having a bit of fun, then you feel relaxed, and if you feel relaxed, then you're able to give more. You know, you free your expressiveness up. But it's a tricky one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Jane puts an interesting point as well, a very important point here from her experience, and that was great in Macca's, as Camille was okay to be asking for help. Though sometimes in terms of practical stuff like changing sets, we had to give him a bollocking once or twice. In Titus, though, it was quite the reverse. Adina wanted an actor to get help, but she flatly refused. Partly it's dance between director and actor, always with the understanding that one actor should never note the other unless that help is asked for. But it is something the director has to be aware of and sometimes be prescriptive about. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Like there is a certain contract too, and you're asking, you do depend hopefully on a very good stage manager, and occasionally an actor, another actor using the right channels to say, are you aware that this is happening? You know, are you aware that this is going on? And then you need to find a way of dealing with something problematic so that the person in question doesn't feel like they've been dobbed in, because that only exacerbates the situation. So you have to, it was really funny. I was doing a show in Japan, and there was a scene in it, quite a large crowd scene, and there were a couple of actors in the scene who kept saying, sorry, do you mind if we do that scene again? And we were in the theatre in tech, and it was extremely time sensitive, and they kept asking to do it, and we'd do it, and then we'd go on, and then they would, you know, they'd ask again, and finally my translator who was working with me said to me quietly, what's happening is that two of the older actors are doing something wrong over there, and these actors are not in the hierarchy of Japanese theatre allowed to ask them to do it differently or to tell them anything. They can only ask to do the scene again until you notice that they're doing something wrong over there. Now, what they were doing wrong was of no importance to me, but it was important to these younger actors. It felt like that was the absolute zen of the thing that we're talking about. Like, it's so systematized in Japan that it's kind of extraordinary, because that respect for your elders is so high in that system. But it's a version of that goes on in every dynamic, I think.
So we're going to be leading up to probably the last question or two. So I've got one from Georgie. Where do you think is the most important place in a production to put your energy in terms of individual elements that make a show up? And how do you organise what you prioritise?
Oh, God, that's such a good question. Yeah, that's such a good question. In the rehearsal room, your energy ideally just has to be performance, 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 performance. And that's one of the things I find difficult about doing the big, very big musicals, because I'll say to the actors, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about getting that piece of scenery on upstage and at that point in enough time while the revolve's turning and that's coming there and that's doing that. So I'm not concentrating on the scene that's happening, I'm concentrating on the logistics. But to bring that down to any level, like any level of directing, I think, once you're in the rehearsal room, it has to be performance. It has to be trying to be performance. So do as much, from my point of view, do as much of the other stuff beforehand as you can. So that is always in the back of your mind. Always kind of got the show that I want to do in the back of my mind, but as much as possible, I pretend I haven't, so that any idea that the actors want to bring into the room can come into the room and be explored, and then maybe it's going to be brilliant because I wouldn't have thought of it, and I can manipulate it, and it becomes part of the bigger picture that I have got sorted out in my head, that, you know, that some elements of which can't change. But really good. I think that's like, I think that whoever you're with needs to feel like they've got the majority of your attention. So when you're working with the designer, it's like the play is all about its design. But when you get to the rehearsal room, actors, ideally.
Well, is there any other questions from anyone else, by the way? No? So I think we should thank you so much for coming along to this little Zoom call. We really, really appreciate your expertise. It's invaluable to us as directors, especially new directors to, I guess, the industry. Thank you so much. We're getting like a flooding of messages.
Yes,
from everyone here.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening, and thanks for introducing me to a whole new technological piece of excitement.
Thank you for being patient with it.
Good luck with everything. I really wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're just going to ask from Jane, where would you like us to go from here?
Saying something completely new.
Yeah.
Shall I check out? Shall I switch off?
If you need to, yeah, definitely, like, do what you need to, I guess. Don't want to be taking up too much of your time. Thank you so much.
All right, not a problem. Okay, see you, everyone. Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
See ya.
It's fantastic. That was cool. Hey.
Thank you for meeting
Shout out to B.
Yay.
Thank you, B.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we just need Jane. Is Jane still in the chat? Yes.
I think so.
We just need your
Happy
director.
typing.
Yeah.
What a lovely dude.
That was really cool. I'm sorry if any of your questions weren't left completely answered. Please let me know. Trying to be the best Jane 2.0 as I can be.
You're doing an amazing job, love. You're awesome.
Thank you. But yeah, I mean, there was like a lot to kind of process there, and like remembering that all of this is recorded. So if anything like you didn't catch, and I'm sure it'll all be on the recording. So yeah, I mean the interesting thing. Oh yeah.
Wait a second for Jane. I think she's trying to get message working, but she's like messaging privately to me because like I privately messaged thank you, and that went to Jane instead of everyone, and now.
Yeah. That's all right. Yeah. No. Oh,
Right.
Okay. Cool. There we go.
Legend. That's right, Jane. We love you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Zoom's been crazy. It's exactly an example of how you can use contact.
For sure.
For sure. Absolutely for sure.
We should all like definitely stay in contact with each other as well, because like obviously we can all see there's a lot of talent in this cohort.
Oh yes,
definitely, yeah.
Everyone's already making wonderful theatre, and this is definitely a network that I would love to keep. I don't know about y'all, but yeah, just wanted to stress that. Bye.
Yeah, so just James, I will be so impressed with you all. So next time you see one of his shows, contact him, remind him that you were in this class and ask him out to lunch and pitch yourself. We should all as a class, all of us, the whole class, do a massive lunch with
One simultaneous pitch.
and Nadina. Yeah.
Just on that statement though, just very randomly, like going out and asking for coffee, this is just kind of like, I guess, for anybody or for Jane, like how do you figure out exactly what you're going to talk about? See, that's my like planning brain that's freaking out there with that whole idea, just in terms of
that's actually
that whole idea of just going out and getting lunch. Like what do you talk, like how do you pitch yourself? How do you not freak out because you have nothing to talk about?
I remember doing this with Justin Gardem because I was kind of asking him about just general stuff, and I remember like I wrote just a bunch of things that were on my mind before I caught up with him. I kind of just went, okay, what are all the things that I'm just thinking about right now regarding this? And then from there, like just mind mapping all my stuff, I kind of went, oh yeah, these are the questions that are kind of arising from that. And then like, I mean, as you kind of see with all these like Zoom things, a lot of that kind of materializes. I don't know about y'all if you've ever done that before, but it's a lot of fun.
That's a good idea though.
I think Jane started to write it out.
Yeah.
So you got a show of those you've seen and you talk first of how that inspired you. That's a good start.
You'll be with me for Georgie. Here you go.
Sorry, I just saw the word part.
I love you, Jane. That's amazing.
Try to butter them up with compliments.
Make it till you make it.
Next week will be with me for Georgie. Here goes. I think that's sure if that is sorry.
Jane, have you had people ask you to coffee that you don't know? Just random question.
Jane.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Jane.
Okay, so did a project that you could have a D with them. You want them to think you're going to be a great contribution to their production, sure. I bombarded Deborah Warner until she gave me a job. And you describing that to us in Greek trage. Oh, that was a fun story.
Oh.
But I was able to let my passion show. Yes, Jane. So I also took Simon out for lunch in a month and asked him for a job. Yeah, that's a good point. Like,
it didn't work.
Oh, Simon! What
no! That's the way it is sometimes, I guess.
Oh my God, we should do like a mock lunch meeting with Jane, and we all like
can we
to Jane.
Oh my God,
like
that would
be
be
like
so
part
good.
of class, like it's an assessment. You like sit down
Jane.
with Jane, and it's like this is
That
my
would
pitch.
that'd be super good.
Jane, you're so
Such a
sweet.
fun assessment.
Oh my God. Yes, let's
How awesome are Mondays
next week mock lunch. All right, guys, let's just plan this out. I think we're talking about this at the start of the meeting. Can we all buy something that we all can eat at the same time?
Yes.
I'm happy to create a set menu.
I'm not gonna lie, I turned my camera off and made
yeah.
lunch in the middle of today's meeting. I was hungry and made lunch.
Right, we'll talk about bullshitting yourself into a job. Yes,
Honestly,
Jane.
though, I feel like that we would all benefit from.
We actually
job
would
interviews
love
are
it.
scary.
Okay, online
It would.
online picnic. Let's go.
Because it's terrifying.
Okay, can we is this going to be the rest of today's lesson? I'm not quite sure what's
Next
going
week,
on,
I
but
think.
yeah. Oh, like in regards to do you want to talk about actually setting a mock lunch for next week's content?
She's telling us about next
I'll
week.
tell you about next week.
Yeah,
Okay.
fantastic. Thanks, Jane.
Woohoo! Oh, we're still recording, by the way.
Yes.
That's good.
That's all right. This is all useful content in the future.
Yes.
I'm the same, Gio. I'm going to be a sweaty mess. So just like warning everyone.
Sorry.
Okay. At 11 to 1, I'm going to take you through some different ways directors can help actors. First off.
Awesome.
A combo of dropping in, abstract improvements, and straight acting.
Bless you.
Then at 1, we'll have our lunch and talk about mock pitching.
Yay!
Fantastic. Have a think of whom you'd like to pitch to. Just a question, is that like a director or like a theatre creative or just a, yeah,
It's a director.
it's a director, you know, fantastic.
This is going to help us with our core unit stuff, hey?
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Pitching the pitch who? All right. So Simon, Adina, I'll do some research into the other actors who are coming in, other directors. I feel like I said something else. I'm sorry for that. Why is it minimized? All right. Okay. Then we'll have a mini role play in pitches. Fantastic.
Jane, do we have a task that we need to do based off Simon's presentations during this week?
That is a big question.
Oh, and also, again, another question about the Henry V readings.
Yeah.
That I've been a bit confused by.
Nona did such an amazing job last week. You can have a rest this week.
Yes, guys.
Thanks, Jane.
Woohoo!
We can all plan. Sorry, can't help with Henry V. Yeah, ask Fiona.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yay!
That's just really cool. I think today's been really, really cool.
Yeah. Like everyone's presentations earlier were actually really good. Like it was super impressive, and like
those TikToks were quality. I'm sorry, they were amazing.
I would love you guys to put that too.
Please follow us, Simons and Dronicus with Z's instead
Maybe
of
we
S's.
should put the like login info to the whole class, and y'all can like add to it.
Oh my god!
Yes.
Add it to the COVID commune. We need to blow it up.
Okay, everyone. But for next week, have a look at the week 4 page by Cobtos. I'll have uploaded a rundown of what to do before next week and what we'll do next week.
Cool.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Close of business.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
We love you. This has been a fantastic one. No, you, Jane. You're amazing.
We love you.
We
getting Simon
heart reacts in the chat.
Yeah. Bye.